Today is Thursday, June 11th, 2026, and today is National Corn on the Cob Day, which is one of those foods that practically requires instructions. You don't really eat corn on the cob so much as negotiate with it. And somehow that connects to today's episode, because all of today's stories involve things that survive far longer than anyone could have reasonably expected. A Bronze Age legend, a movie about a stranded alien, and a video game cartridge that sold for more than many people's houses. Welcome to Wait, That's Random, This Day in History. I'm C.L. Burns, voice actor, audiobook narrator, and someone who keeps finding historical stories that sound completely fake until you realize they actually happened. A traditional historical calculation places the fall of Troy on June 11th, 1184 BC. Now, before we go any further, it's important to mention that historians do not actually know the exact date Troy fell. In fact, historians still debate how much of the famous story happened at all. But the reason this story survives isn't because of certainty, it's because of the details. According to legend, Greek armies spent 10 years trying to conquer the city of Troy. 10 years. Imagine a war lasting so long that children grew up knowing nothing else. The city held. The walls remained standing. The attackers couldn't break through. Then came the idea that would outlive nearly everyone involved: the Trojan Horse. The Greeks supposedly built an enormous wooden horse, left it outside the city, and pretended to sail away. The Trojans celebrated. The war appeared over. The giant horse was brought inside the city walls, and that night hidden soldiers emerged from inside the structure, opened the gates, and allowed the Greek army to enter. It's one of the most famous stories in history. There's only one problem. Nobody knows if it actually happened. Archaeologists have found evidence that Troy existed, evidence that it was destroyed, evidence of conflict. But a giant wooden horse? No proof. Some historians think the horse may have been symbolic. Others think the story evolved over centuries. Still others believe there may have been a kernel of truth hidden inside the legend. What's fascinating is that it almost doesn't matter. The phrase Trojan horse survived. Thousands of years later, we still use it. Military strategists use it. Writers use it. Cybersecurity experts use it. Entire generations know the concept even if they've never read a line of Homer. That's remarkable staying power. Most stories disappear. This one became part of the language. And speaking of stories that embedded themselves in culture, June 11th also gave us one of the most beloved films ever made. On June 11th, 1982, E.T. the Extraterrestrial opened in theaters across the United States. And almost immediately, something unusual happened. People fell in love with it. Not just enjoyed it, loved it. At first glance, the premise sounds simple. A stranded alien befriends a lonely boy. But Steven Spielberg understood something powerful. The movie wasn't really about an alien. It was about childhood, wonder, friendship, loneliness, and what it feels like to believe something extraordinary might be hiding just beyond everyday life. Audiences responded immediately. The film became a phenomenon. Lines stretched around theaters. Families returned to see it multiple times. Word of mouth spread rapidly. Before long, E.T. was everywhere. Lunchboxes, toys, posters, television specials, video games. One image in particular became iconic, a bicycle silhouetted against the moon. It's amazing how often a single image can carry an entire story. And that image still works today. Even people who haven't seen the movie often recognize it. One detail I enjoy is that many scenes involving the child actors were filmed in ways designed to preserve genuine reactions. Spielberg often revealed effects gradually rather than all at once. He wanted surprise, wonder, authentic emotion. The result was a movie that felt sincere. And sincerity has a longer shelf life than people sometimes realize. More than 40 years later, audiences still introduce E.T. to new generations. That's not just a successful movie, that's a cultural inheritance. And then there are stories that survive in a completely different way. Not through myths, not through movies, but through collecting. On June 11th, 2021, a sealed copy of the original Super Mario Bros. Sold at auction for a record-breaking amount. The final price? $2 million for a video game cartridge. Now, if you're old enough to remember blowing dust out of game cartridges, that number probably sounds slightly ridiculous, which is part of what made the story so fascinating. The game itself wasn't rare. Millions of copies were produced. What made this one special was its condition. It remained sealed, untouched, preserved, essentially frozen in time. Collectors viewed it the way art collectors view a pristine painting, or coin collectors view a rare mint specimen. And the auction ignited a broader conversation. What exactly creates value? The plastic cartridge wasn't worth $2 million because of its materials. It was worth that amount because of what it represented. Nostalgia, history, cultural significance. A connection to childhood memories. People who grew up playing Nintendo suddenly found themselves looking at objects from their youth displayed behind glass like museum artifacts, which is a strange experience. At some point, the things you played with become historical objects, and the older I get, the more often I notice that happening. One generation's everyday item becomes another generation's collectible. That's history quietly sneaking up on people. And after spending today's episode around stories that remained culturally relevant for decades, or in Troy's case, millennia, it feels appropriate to end with someone whose performances continued finding new audiences. Born on June 11, 1933 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Gene Wilder became one of the most distinctive actors of his generation. His early interest in performing came from a deeply personal place. His mother had health problems, and a doctor reportedly suggested that making her laugh might help brighten her spirits. Wilder took the advice seriously. That interest eventually became a career, and what a career it was. Many actors became known for one role. Wilder created several. Willy Wonka, Dr. Frederick Frankenstein, Leo Bloom. Characters that remained instantly recognizable decades later. What set him apart wasn't volume, it was spectacle, it was unpredictability. He could move from calm to chaotic in seconds, from gentle to completely unhinged, sometimes within the same sentence. One moment he seemed perfectly reasonable. The next moment he was screaming about fizzy lifting drinks or announcing that someone was putting on the Ritz. Audiences never quite knew what was coming next, and that unpredictability became part of the charm. His performances continued finding new viewers because they didn't feel tied to a specific era. They're simply funny and genuinely human. Looking back across today's stories, what struck me was how difficult it is to predict what survives. A Bronze Age legend, a family movie, a video game cartridge, an actor's performance. At the moment they're created, they're simply part of the present. Only later do they become history. Anyway, that's what I ended up finding while working through June 11th. And before I head out, here's today's oddly appropriate quote. Time flies like an arrow. Fruit flies like a banana. Groucho Marx. If you'd like to hear more of my work, audiobooks, or other projects I've somehow gotten myself involved in, you can find everything over at waitthat'srandom.com. I'm C.L. Burns, and honestly, thank you for spending a little time being curious with me. I'll see you tomorrow.